Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you so much for joining as we are about to enter into a delightful yet preoccupying conversation, right? Something that should be preoccupying our minds is what the dickens is happening in the world. And the fact of the matter is that our economies are in shambles, and we're not hearing anything coming out of Jamaica, out of the Caribbean at large, out of the so-called, South, what do you call it, global South. All we're hearing are reactionary punditries to Trump. Oh, Trump is insane and Trump doesn't understand the global economy and Trump doesn't understand globalization and neoliberalism. What we're seeing in the global South, particularly in Jamaica, is the defense of the status quo. Our president, our prime ministers and presidents are defending the status quo. It's interesting. Yesterday, I was reading, or day before yesterday, I was reading an article from the Trinidad Guardian newspaper. That's their main newspaper in Trinidad. Trinidad and Guardian. Is it Trinidad Guardian or Trinidad and Guardian? I know you have the Trinidad Express, but I think it could be the Trinidad and Guardian. Now, that paper was reporting that there was supposed to have been a deal. A license was issued under the Biden administration in which Trinidad could have gotten a license, or they were given two licenses to extract natural gas from Venezuela in collaboration with the Venezuelan government. But because Trump has now upped the game in terms of sanctioning Venezuela, since the Biden administration has, was voted out of office, it seems now that the United States has revoked the license, which would have granted Trinidad and Tobago to work with Venezuela to extract natural gas, which is at the center, which is the bedrock of the Trinidadian and the Venezuelan economy, both economies. It seems now that because that those licenses rather have been revoked, that the United States, that Trinidad rather is about to enter into an economic malaise and steep decline. It is bothersome. It is something that is worth doing research on, and I'm perhaps will try to do a video on it. But what is really saddening and should be an area of concern, should be a cause of concern to many of us, is how little knowledge our Caribbean economists have, and the lackluster role that our universities have played, particularly the University of the West Indies, because it receives a lot of monies from the government, right? The University of the West Indies, and they have not really they have not really produced any world-class economists. You send students to different universities and professors from the University of the West Indies who were lectured at the UWI, who graduated from the University of the West Indies, but they're just really, repeating the old same narratives coming out of these Western universities. And if you listen to our professors at the University of the West Indies, and I've had, the great fortune, maybe not so much great fortune of listening to some of them, they are so narrow-minded, they're so visceral in their thinking that they think that a great university means defending the status quo and doing things the way how universities have been doing things for forever. Just having a dead curriculum where students go there and they repeat ad nauseum what their professors have said. And the University of the West Indies has this notorious image and reputation of just having people just verbatim, recite what their professors have told them. And if you dare walk outside of the remit of your professors, of the manner of thinking of the professors, then you are going to be failing. They're going to fail you. They're going to give you an F. They're going to put a pause in your degree. Because how dare you challenge heterodoxy, right? You have to be able to, to think in the way that the masses think and not in the way that you should think. Because the purpose of a university is to be able to think critically. And in thinking critically, you might have to step, off the grounds on which the people are walking. and begin to think for yourself and to have some amount of intellectual curiosity, which many of us lack. And one of the reasons why we lack intellectual curiosity is we don't read anymore. Our world is so fast-paced. We have moved from reading to entertainment, to going to movies, to watching sports. Everything is entertainment to titillate the little mind. And there's no capacity to think. People of yesteryear used to read. When you look, C.L.R. James, when you read his books and you listen to his telling you that he used to read one book 4 times and 5 times, sometimes he could memorize large chunks of those books because of how often he read those books. You had, for example, Jane Andrews, one of the founding member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who the name Andrews University is named after him, right? That could quote entire scripture from Matthew to Revelation without looking at it. He memorized the entire scriptures and also independently learned 7 languages. I think that's what he learned, 7 languages, and wrote them quite well, right? Wrote them quite well independently because those people had intellectual curiosity. They had intellectual curiosity. And what we're seeing coming out of our universities are not people who are prepared for the world in which we live. Right? They don't have the requisite knowledge, neither do they have the requisite skills. What they do have are skills to work in a factory. So you go there and you do your job and you think that that is what it is about, right? Whether you're a doctor, you're a pharmacist, you're a teacher, you just do the job. Or a lawyer, you just do what you're asked to do, but you don't understand the world in which you live. And we have to now get out of that realm. And people generally who can think are not the ones who are going to be given the superior positions because they don't want people to think. They don't want people who question what is happening in our world. Now, years ago, when C.L.R. James wrote the Black Jacobins, right, I think he wrote that book in 1938. It was first published in 1938. And then he had a second edition published, a second edition of the Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James was published in 1962. For those of you who do not know, C.L.R. James was a Trinidadian intellectual, one of the greatest minds that the Caribbean has produced. And I think that he is. And one of the things I like about C.L.R. James is that he doesn't care what you think. If what he's suggesting, if he has really analyzed something very well, he stands confidently and he stands his ground, right? I might not be a socialist and a communist as C.L.R. James was, right? I don't believe in that philosophy. However, he has a lot that he can share with us that we can learn from him. And one of the key aspects of his knowledge is the fact that he is an expert on this whole slave master plantation-like behavior of most of our Caribbean West Indian societies. Listen to what Sarah James is saying in the Black Jacobins, and this is found on page 406. So those of you who have the Black Jacobins, you can go to page 406, and you can see, I'm reading here the last paragraph on that page, the Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. In 1963, this is what C.L.R. James is suggesting. The old colonial system is not what it was in 1863. It evolves. Just like we have democracy evolves. It is not static. It evolves. And we have to always be guardian of democracy. What we have in our world today, people just sit and think, oh, we have a democracy, we just sit down and vote every 4 or 5 years, and then things are going to be all right, depending on the person who's in the office. And it doesn't work like that. We have to understand that it is a system that we ought to be vigilant of, but we often are not because we want to be entertained constantly. In 1863, it was not what it had been in 1763 or 1663. So this constant evolution of the plantation in Jamaica, which we still have a plantation economy. It's not a neoliberalized, globalized plantation that we have in Jamaica at the moment. The fundamentals outlined above, however, have not changed, but for the first time, the system is now threatened not from without, but from within. A lot of what the system that we're seeing is not threatened by systems without, as Trump is suggesting that it's foreigners and it's illegal immigration that is really a threat, a major threat to the United States democracy. It is not. It is from within, right? The same politicians that you are voting in and out. So he said that it's not from without. The threats are not from without, but from within, not by communism, not by socialism, but by plain, simple parliamentary democracy. The elites don't want parliamentary democracy. They don't want the sort of democratic Republican state that the United States founding fathers founded in the United States. They don't want that. The old colonial system in the West Indies was not a democratic system, was not born as such. It cannot, what should I say now? It cannot live with democracy. So the old colonial system cannot live with democracy, just like the United States being an empire cannot continue to be a Republican state. It can't be a democracy and an empire at the same time. The two are just not compatible. Just like the old order of the plantation system is not compatible with democracy, either or that we should elect. And in Jamaica, we have decided to remain with the former, with the plantation, with the plantocracy. Within a West Indian island, the old colonial system and democracy are incompatible. One has to go, right? And we are not prepared for the old form to go. That is the logic of development of every West Indian territory. Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, the former British colonies, the former French colonies, and even Puerto Rico, the poor relationships, the poor relation rather of the wealthy United States. So we have the supreme wrong of West Indies politics is that the old colonial system has so isolated the ruling classes, right? So this system now has so isolated the ruling classes from the national community that plain, ordinary parliamentary democracy, suffused with a sense of national identity, can remake the islands. So what they do, they sever, they separate the national elites, the political and economic elites, from you, the ordinary man and woman. So their reality is totally different from yours. And that is what you hear coming out of their mouths when they speak, which will now allow me to speak about your boy, Bruce Golding, former Prime Minister of Jamaica, and one who I really, well, to whom I used to look up. I'm not sure I'm looking up to Bruce Golding anymore. I don't think that he represents the ordinary man or that his thinking represents the revolutionary ideas of trying to create a space in modern Jamaica where the masses can live, can reside, and live comfortably. I don't think he is interested in that. I think Golding is interested in defending the status quo. Now, I'm not suggesting here that he's doing it deliberately, perhaps because of lack of knowledge and lack of wisdom, which he should have now because he's in his 70s. And we should see this elder statesman-like demeanor from not only his behavior, but from the words that emerge from his mouth. But we're not seeing that coming out of Bruce Golding, and at least in recent times. You know, we're not seeing that coming out of his mouth. So let's go into his article. He has written an article here in the Jamaican Observer, and that was published on April 13th, 2025, in which he asks a question, and very important questions. And I'm not suggesting here that everything in his article is not good, but you're going to see what he's saying. Why don't we learn history's lesson? That's the question that Bruce Golding, former Prime Minister of Jamaica, is posing to his readership audience. Now, let me share my screen here so that you can see from whence I'm reading. I'm not making up stories on your boy. Now, we have here US President Donald Trump has unleashed a tariff offensive against every country in the world. His argument is that the United States has been unfairly treated, luring away investments and jobs. He claims his strategies are designed to balance trading relationships and bring jobs back to the US. He's obviously oblivious to the lessons of history. Beautifully said. I think he summed up what Donald Trump is doing very well, which Bruce Golding knows to do. Tariff offenses are one form of trade war, which is true. They have been used in the past with disastrous consequences, the most significant of which was the Fordney-Macomber tariff measures of 1922, introduced by President Warren Harding, that raised the average tariff on American imports to 38%. Now, Bruce Golding is also suggesting this when America was one, not yet the military empire, which it is now. This was pre-World War II, right? This was pre-World War II in 1922. The United States was just becoming now, was on the path of becoming the world empire after the British Empire would have fallen after World War II. So this would have been different here. The United States could not impose on the world tariffs at that time because Britain was still at that time the global, even though she was weakening, the global empire, right? So this was a total different context. Another thing is that with the creation of the Treasury, the what do you call it now, the Department of Treasury, it's not Department of Treasury, the Central Bank of the United States. What do they call it? Oh my Lord. The Central Bank of the United States. I'm just not coming to mind right now. Whatever. Yeah, that central bank, that of the United States. Before that was created in 1913, and taxes, income taxes were levied on American people. This whole matter of it reinterpreted what tariffs, the purpose of tariff was about, right? Because before, Americans didn't pay income tax before 1913. All right. So that's why many people are suggesting that they need to get rid of a central bank, because central banks are not designed to defend the economic interests of the nation. They're designed to protect the interests of the global and domestic elites. And that is what we have to understand. The policies that they formulate are not policies. The Federal Reserve, that's the name of the bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, right? The Federal Reserve Act was formulated in 1913, right? So that was a totally different era, which moved the United States more into economic decline, because as the economic class, the capitalists started to dictate the policies of government. Okay? Now, the major exporting countries to the United States retaliated with significant tariff increases in American goods. So yes, they would, because America was not yet the global power. It was a world power, but not the preeminent hegemonic power that it now is. And then Bruce Golding should know that. This resulted in huge price increases to consumers across the world, loss of market confidence, and stock market decline without any compensating benefit to the US economy. Many historians insist that it was this initiative that led to the Great Depression. Well, that was one of, not the major one, of the 1930s, which left 15 million Americans out of work and many more close to starvation. It was, again, the same system that we have now, where they have these artificial markets that they have formulated, and everything is dependent on the market and an artificial market. You cannot build an economy on superficial markets and on the stock market. That is what led to the global depression, which we are about to experience another global depression because of what we're doing, right? We cannot have our economic infrastructure be dependent upon artificial market fundamentals that we have to wait and see. However, the market, it is artificially designed, right? It is artificially designed, and we have to come up with sane policies. And I'm not suggesting that Trump's ad hoc, emotional, reactive tariff policies are going to be the solution to our problems. They are not, because we are in a globalized economy that the United States itself fashioned. What happened is that it has used and abused the same system that it has crafted, and now that the system is working against her and is impoverishing her, is weakening her financially, she wants to change the system to suit her whims, and that is what we're seeing right now. The world seemed to have learned from this and other trade war experience, and this led to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, in 1947. Subsequently, the World Trade Organization in 1995, which sought to establish rules for trade among countries that would foster economic growth, lower prices to consumers, whose ability to spend underlies economic activity, and avoid a repeat of Fordney-Macomber. So he's suggesting that all of what was the whole tariffs about the Ford Macomber was just what led to the America's decline and the world decline. No, right? Since then, tariffs have been used as targeted sanctions in political disputes, as in the case of Iran and Russia, which is true. The United States has used tariffs and other economic sanctions, not only tariffs, but other economic sanctions to weaken nations. They sometimes freeze people's money, which is really undemocratic, that somebody would have their money and you freeze it. That is totalitarianism, that you are going to freeze the money that I have. It's my money. It's literally stealing people's money. Trump sees things differently. He argues that countries all over the world are taking unfair advantage of the huge American market with gigantic consumer demand by clever fiscal measures, unfair labor policies, and currency manipulation. A large number of American investors have established manufacturing and processing facilities abroad, feeding the US market with cheaper goods to the delight of its consumers. Yes, but to the delight of its consumers at what cost? Yes, they're delighted to go to Walmart and to Costco and all of these large American shopping centers to buy and their name brand handbag and their Gucci this and that. But at the end of the day, at what cost? If you have taken away the manufacturing jobs and you don't have a manufacturing base, you have impoverished large swath of humanity in the capitalist world. And Golding is not suggesting here that that's the reality. All he's saying that American citizens are delighted. And yet still many of them are indebted also, even though the things are cheap and they get them cheaper and of better quality than many in the global south. But they're also using their credit cards to get these things and they are indebted as we speak, right? So the things might be cheap, yes, but it's not building an economy in the long term. And that is what we're seeing now. The economy is falling apart. Mr. Golding, the US economy is falling apart. And when Mr. Biden and and Barack Obama, by the way, Barack Obama was the one who unceremoniously took you out of your office. Have you forgotten that? And was this just about Dudus, or did it also, was it about the IMF and their old neoliberal agenda that you did not really agree with under a democratic president? I wonder if Bruce Golding is suffering from amnesia. It wasn't Trump who was inflicting and imposing the most austere economic IMF policy on Jamaica in the history of the IMF. And you did not say, well, you protested and they took you out by using the pretext as a way to get you out of office, and you were voted unceremoniously out of office under a democratic president. Trump doesn't understand why they did so. Manufacturers and producers are cost sensitive. So he's giving Trump a lesson as if Trump wants his lesson. Trump is a businessman. He's a billionaire. Are you a billionaire, Mr. Golding? And I'm not suggesting here that Trump is an honest billionaire, but he knows how the system is run. He might not be an astute economist in terms of talking about, talking with the jargons of that economists use, but he knows how businesses are run. He knows how businesses are run. And he himself even employ H-1B workers and cheap workers to work at his, companies, right? At his corporations. Doesn't he? I'm sure. You don't have to lecture him about that, Mr. Golding. Including Mr. Golding, you need to understand that this is not only a Trump war, this is a US empire war that we are now engaged in, right? Not Trump. Doesn't have anything to do with Trump. Trump is just the face of what the policies that we see are being imposed upon the world. And Bruce Golding should know that, but he chooses not to. They will locate their plants where they are able to produce efficiently and at the lowest cost, whether it is in Mexico, China, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, or India. This has to do not only with labor costs, but work culture. Observe a production line in China and compare it with a similar line in America. What's this point? Are you suggesting, Mr. Golding, that the capitalists should just exploit human labor and go wherever they want with no regulations? And that is what Bill Clinton, your boy, decided to do in the 1990s. He removed all of the economic regulations and deregulated and deindustrialized the American economy. And so he put the American, people in poverty. That was the death knell that they were about to enter the poverty line. And America was going down on a very severe slope of economic decline. That should not happened without a serious debate. And there was none. And people were too enamored with the Clintons and, his verbiage and his rhetoric, right? It was interesting when I, in the early 2000s, and I used to read voraciously on the Clintons and the Clinton era. A lot of what I learned in university, ladies and gentlemen, is not what I was tasked to learn at university. The homework that I got was boring. Lots of what I was learning and that professors were teaching at Howard University was just not what the real world was about. So what I would do, I would visit a lot of times university libraries. One of them was University of Maryland, which had a gigantic library and also bookstore. And I would go to the bookstore and I would see what they're reading. And give the University of Maryland, at the time, I don't know what it's doing now, College Park, they would do some good studies. And you go to their graduate studies and the books that they were reading, and I used to buy them. I couldn't wait. And I went to a lot of bookstores in Silver Spring, Maryland, in Washington, D.C., and I read. And these were not books that that I was tasked with reading. It was because I realized that what I was learning conflicted with the real world. And we have to begin to understand that a lot of what we're learning is really not preparing us for the real world. And this is what my podcast is all about, that we have to begin now to re-educate our minds and to unlearn and to learn things, to unlearn the things that we have learned and that are dangerous to our development and the development of our young children and grandchildren and the development of our societies at large. Now, let's continue with Golding, because Golding is here, stating his points. The effect of Trump's tariffs offensive in a country that is so import-dependent, trade deficit of $1.2 trillion, is that the consumers will pay more and consequently buy less. And that is true. But what is going to be the solution? Because we can't continue like this, in which the United States is racking up a deficit. He's actually made a trade deficit of US 1.2 trillion. This is unsustainable. So Trump might not be doing, it's how he's doing it, just like the pandemic. It's how he's doing it. It's not that something does not have to be done. Something has to be done. Something had to be done to contain the pandemic. There was a pandemic. However it came about, there was a pandemic. It is how the pandemic was treated that was the problem. It is not that it had not, we could just sit and do nothing. There was a disease that had to be cured, right? It's how that we went about curing the disease. Just the same thing with our economic malaise. It's how the prescription that they're giving us that might not be the best prescription. But Mr. Golding, under the Democratic Party, the deficit of 1.2 trillion US dollars, it's a lot of money. You and I probably haven't seen $1 million US dollars, much as $1 trillion US dollars, right? It cannot continue. It's unsustainable. So what is your solution? That they just continue like that? Trump also does not understand the workings of the global supply chain, in which a finished consumer product, whether or a motor car, blender, screwdriver, even a simple lead pencil, involves the production and trade efforts of manufacturers in several countries, taking advantage of the efficiency benefits at each point. So yeah, efficiency means exploitation. And Golding is okay with that. I would like to look at what is happening in the head, in the brain of Bruce Golding. So if a former government, a former prime minister can speak like that, can you imagine how they are exploiting our Jamaican workers there? Because efficiency is all about exploitation as far as these capitalists are concerned. You take your machine wherever you can get cheaper labor. And wherever you don't have laws, you don't have unions to protect the laborer, just take them there. Because in the United States, they do have some labor laws. And that is why the factors can remain there. This is interesting. Can US producers fill the breach? Not if the consumers are going to find their prices affordable. So it's all about the affordability of prices. And I'm not suggesting that it should not be, right? But we also have to ask the question, why are these prices so high in the first place? And why do our capitalists or manufacturers, why do they have to make all of these obscene profits? Maybe we need to talk about that. Maybe we need to say, yes, you can make a profit because that's what capitalism is all about. But why do you have to make these astronomical profits, these obscene profits at the detriment of the populace? That's the question we need to ask, not about the prices. And Golding needs to think. Golding needs to think. Too much Jamaican food in your head. Many of these inputs will still have to be imported by the US. The result is likely to be higher prices, business closures, and job losses leading to less consumer expenditure. That's one perspective, but we have to have a thorough, exhaustive perspective on capitalism and look at the history of capitalism and how it has exploited human labor and say ways in which policies that we can craft, in which yes, the capitalist class, the manufacturing base can make their profits, can generate a high income, but not to the detriment of working classes, of the masses of people that live within these countries. That is what we need to do. Or if not, then Mr. Golding, you are still defending, you are simply defending the status quo, which you are doing, And that is what you have been known to have been doing all these years. You are unmasking, as it were, who you really are. Just like water finding its own level, producers opt for the best equation in terms of costs and profits. Yeah, that's what they did to slavery too. Right. If you can go to Africa and the Africans are willing to give you some black people to go and mine some bauxite in Jamaica, why not do it? If you can get free labor. This is the sort of argument that Bruce Golding is actually laying. Go wherever you get cheap labor. If you read about and watch documentaries on some of the manufacturing bases in Vietnam and some of these countries like in Indonesia, these people work like horses for nothing, for cents, that are barely able to eke out a living, a standard of living. And this is what Golding is defending. Golding is defending this economic infrastructure. Go wherever you find it's more efficient. And efficiency here does not have to just do with getting the work done, right? But getting the work done at what cost? At slave labor cost. And slavery was productive too. It generated a lot of income. And it was also efficient. Right? But it didn't last. It didn't last. Because when you exploit human labor, eventually they're going to rise up. Eventually, they are going to rise up and they're going to burn down all of the money and the infrastructure that you would have built up. And that is what we should have learned from slavery. That yes, you can be enriched, but at what cost? Both human cost and cost of infrastructure. Right? Look at Haiti, Saint-Domingue, the richest colony in the Western Hemisphere up to the late 19th century. The richest colony in the Western Hemisphere, burnt to the ground by the slaves. What if they had just decided to pay the slaves, the so-called slaves, a livable income and just have them be free to work as the free laborers? It wouldn't have happened, and Haiti perhaps would have been the richest country in the world, right? Or one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But they decided that it was efficient by killing people and replacing them with new slaves, with a batch of new slaves. And the system, Mr. Golding, was quite efficient. It was brutal, but quite efficient, if that's what you're suggesting. Trump fails to understand that the global market, like the like the genie, cannot be put back in the lamp. His moves rather will have some effect, but it is likely to be a realignment of trading relationships that is unlikely to benefit the US economy. But benefit the US economy for whom? Right? Because obviously the reason why his base has put Trump into power is because they are tired, they are exhausted of this neoliberal system in which the rich is getting richer and the poor is getting poorer. And they are left impoverished, indebted. And these politicians are going to enslave them. When you're indebted, the government can enslave you. Did you know that there were laws in the United States when you were indebted in the 17th, the 18th century, you could be imprisoned. Debt, you could go to prison. Yeah. So what if they should reinstitute that law that if you're indebted to a certain amount of money, you can go to prison or you have to just work as a slave? And that was typical for many economies for many years, where people you could be sold out as a slave if you were indebted to someone. And I think we're moving fast into that direction. China, which is on the cusp of becoming the largest economy in the world, is not likely to cave into Trump's demands. Eventually they will, because the United States is this global empire now. It's not the empire, it's not the country of the world power of 1922, of which Bruce Golding has made reference. This is not the United States of 1922. This is the United States of 2025, which is the most formidable military apparatus empire that this world has ever seen and has ever known. A striking difference between the approaches of the two countries is that the US strategizes in terms of years. China thinks in terms of decades and is prepared to persevere for the long term. The United States thinks in terms of decades too when it comes on to its military. That's why it invests more in its military than all of the developed nations combined. However, China, I agree with him, is not investing in its military. I think it has the second largest military in the world too now. That's my understanding. However, they still do not invest as much in their military as America does. So America is emphasizing more on the maintenance of its military than on the maintenance of its citizens, developing its real economy. And that's the difference. It's not that America is not also thinking in decades. They are. That's why they invest in their military more than all of the developed nations in the world combined. Something that should really boggle the mind. China is very likely to pursue, with attractive enticements, new trade agreements with the European Union, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, leaving the US as a helpless observer. Trump's gutting of its foreign aid programs leaves it less leverage to pressure countries in these regions to stay away from China. Well, that is true from a theoretical perspective, but from a hardcore foreign policy perspective, he can do it, and he's accomplishing it. If he says to Jamaica tomorrow, and Bruce Golding, you should know that you can no longer accept aid from China. They did that with Venezuela. Then Jamaica has to do it. That is what we call a hardcore foreign policy, where it is going to be, if you don't do it, then the military is going to be sent there to bomb. Or we'll remove the prime minister. We'll have a coup d'etat. I think Bruce Golding should understand these measures. Yes, from a theoretical perspective. All of what Bruce Golding is presenting here is mere theory, right? Theoretical. That's what is in the mind. And a lot of times, as I've said to you, the theory is not in alignment with the reality. The reality, yes, some of what we're saying theoretically is logical, but you must understand that the reality is also logical, and we have to confront the reality. We have to confront the reality, okay? And we have to look at the root causes, which what's his name, Bruce Golding, fails to do. The mixed messages coming out of the Trump administration have not been helpful to his strategy, which is true. Trump is just chaotic. Today he says something, tomorrow he says another thing. It's where are you going? You have to be definitive. I agree with Golding here. Trump needs to be more consistent with what he says. And you can't be changing things. Yes, we are humans and we make mistakes, we blunder, but not so with the economy. You can't just be changing. You have to sit down and thoroughly investigate and stop changing, nightly, minutely, hourly your policies. It doesn't make any sense. It looks very chaotic, like you're playing game. And that I think, to some extent, I think he is getting what he wants out of the chaos that he is creating. Now, some people suggest that Trump was closely aligned with organized crime, with the mafia, and that's what they do too. That's how they do business. Total chaos, and from the chaos that they reign in these countries, that's how they make the art of the deal. So you decide. Some spokespersons insist that these new tariffs are firm and are there to stay. Others state that they provide a basis for negotiations. If I were a US investor with my manufacturing plant in China or Vietnam, considering whether I should relocate my plant to the US, why would I take that decision not knowing what the outcome of those negotiations will be and whether it would be advantageous for me to relocate? And that's a good question. But guess what? They were the ones also who benefited from the laws of the United States. And when the United States was deregulated and they made millions of dollars and they got tax breaks and they've benefited from all of these loopholes, Mr. Golding, that yes, if it were that they had to go back now, they should be willing to pay some cost because the American people suffered by the policies that their government, whom they paid to have been there and to have defended the interests of the masses of people, who did not defend their interests, from the Bill Clintons to the George W. Bushes and the Barack Hussein Obama to Trump himself and the Bidens. They have not secured and protected, shielded the American people away from predatory capitalism. So I'm not sorry for the people, the capitalist class, who, if they had to go back and they had to suffer some loss, because they really have been bathing in money over the years at the expense of the impoverishment of the people, the large masses of United States citizens. So, Mr. Golding, what do you have to say, sir? Trump's moves and retaliatory responses of several other major countries have effectively left the WTO moribund, which it should. The global trade rules that countries like Jamaica had reluctantly signed up for have in reality been suspended, and they should be suspended because it's not working for us. Mr. Golding, globalization and the WTO, whatever, and all of these policies have not worked for Jamaica. It has worked for you and the elites, but it has not worked for the masses of people. So maybe you have a business in Jamaica right now and you're worried. Jamaican people have been worried for years. And they have had no prosperity in Jamaica. You and your family have been having some prosperity in Jamaica. The masses of Jamaicans have not had years of prosperity, Mr. Golding. Are you thinking about yourself and the economic elites in Jamaica? Do you only want to maintain the status quo, the economic and political status quo in Jamaica? Or do you want to see a world that shares the resources, if not equally, but justly? Let me use that word, justly, fairly. Okay? Trump's tariff strategy is inane. Jamaica cannot be accused of indulging in unfair labor practices. Or labor regulations are far more stringent than those of the United States, which is true, nor can our trade balance be a problem for the US since we import from them 4 times. This is what Golding is saying, the Prime Minister, 4 times more than they import from us. Yet he has slapped a 10% tariff on Jamaican exports to the US because we are the ones who signed on to this agreement, Mr. Golding. We signed on to these unfair agreements even under the Democratic Party. And during the time of the WTO, when it came into power, into operation, it was under the Bill Clinton administration. And we love the Democratic Party to bed. I mean, Black people and the Caribbean people, they're in love with the Democratic Party. You know, I learned about the Democratic Party around about 2002, and that this Democratic Party is perhaps the worst party that you can align yourself to. Yeah, because they are very clever at concealing who they really are, right? The Democratic Party is a dangerous party. That's all I can say to you. More so than the Republican Party, because at least the Republican Party tell you who they are. They're capitalists and they're about making huge profits. The Democrats are too, but they hide under the veil of cultural equality and racial equality, which they don't believe in, by the way. Because if we're going to have equality, you have to have economic equality. That is where you're going to have the races living together peacefully when they know that the other is economically as powerfully as they are. And that is what Marcus Garvey was trying to tell us, that we have to build the economic base if we want any respect from these so-called Western people, right? But we have not believed in that. Right now, we're more interested in talking about patois. And is patois the language of globalization? And patois is synonymous and is equal, is on a plane footing with English, and all of that's nonsense. At the same time, Jamaica is one of the poorest countries in the Caribbean and Latin American region. We don't care about that. What we care about is talking about and giving, these piecemeal solutions as Golding is doing here, and holding on to straw, because this, of course, is defending the global economic infrastructure that Golding is doing right here, because he benefits from it. Golding benefits from this system, but the masses of Jamaicans, Mr. Golding, are not benefiting, have not benefited, and will never benefit from this system. Ghana, on the other hand, enjoys a huge trade surplus with the US simply because it has natural resources that America needs. And it doesn't have the purchasing power to buy an equivalent amount of goods from America. Its exports, too, have been slapped with a 10% tariff, which is not fair. I agree 100% with what Mr. Golding is saying here. But is the world operating on fairness? When you go to Jamaica, you're talking about our labor laws there, are they really fair and just? I don't think they are. They might be more stringent than the United States, but are they fair? Don't think they are. Trump refuses to acknowledge that America no longer holds a monopoly over technology and innovation that have dramatically changed the global production landscape. He refuses to accept the advances that have been made in places like China, Japan, India, Indonesia. The US no longer owns that patent, and his attempted disruption of the supply chain will not diminish the ability of these countries to produce quality products cost effectively. Yes, the US market may now be less accessible, but some of their exports to the US were merely transiting to other countries, which is true. That's why it's going to affect us. The tariffs are going to affect us because they're transiting. Many of these goods transit from these countries through the US to other countries. They are capable of finding a workaround which will reduce US re-exports. Again, theoretical speculation. The US has its way of doing things which are not in any way diplomatic, Mr. Golding. We are no longer living in a diplomatic age. We're living in the age where the United States is exercising the full might of its military empire and its imperial ambitions. Okay, that's the age in which we live, Mr. Golding. Very important that you understand that. Cracks have emerged among senior Republicans regarding the efficacy of Trump's tariff offensive. I can't see this now, so let me just stop here. Okay, then. No doubt over concern that voters are likely to revolt. Senator Ted Cruz, a sycophantic Trump supporter, was strident in his condemnation. Senator John Kennedy, though less strident, declared that this is now Trump's economy, and if his policies succeed, he deserves the credit. But if they fail, he has to accept the blame. And I agree with that. Even Elon Musk, through a social media post by his brother, inveighed against the tariff measures and declared that its chief architect, Peter Navarro, despite his Harvard PhD, had not ever built. And you know what that word is. Demonstrations are increasing across the US against Trump's policies. The US's policies, okay? Trump is only the face, including the drastic deportation measures, the evisceration of welfare programs and their agencies, and the looming cost impacts of his tariff measures. It is interesting how hypocritical Jamaicans are. Very interesting, right? Where Golding is defending the fact that Trump should not be as austere as he is, right? In which he is upending the welfare state, as it were, as we know it. But didn't Golding and these people do it under the IMF? This is what he also was, protesting. And they booted him out of office. That we have to impose austerity on the Jamaican people. We have to take away their jobs. We have to invest less in education and in healthcare and in job creation. It's the same austerity. The same austerity that Trump is imposing on the American populace is the same austerity, and perhaps worse than the IMF has imposed on the global south, on countries of the global south. And Golding doesn't speak about it. After he was booted out of office, Golding has never spoken about the history of the IMF and how devastating their policies have been on third world economies. He has never attempted to do that. What Golding has often defended is the status quo of the economic infrastructure. You listen to his radio programs, and that is what he has defended. He calls the same and interviews the same lame ducks every time. And they're not saying anything. They have no clue of what they're talking about. The Damian Kings and all of these people they are just kissing the ring of the guardians of this neoliberal global economy in which we live. And Golding loves that. Yet they are the same ones now to be criticizing Trump for wanting to cut back because America is overspending. Yes, I agree that Trump might not be doing it in the right way. Yes, I agree that the IMF is also not doing it in the right way, because there's no way that you can cut back on what poor. They're not getting anything from the first place, and you're cutting back right, left, and center the little that they're getting. Right? And Golding and all of these prime ministers, former as well as current prime ministers of Jamaica, have never resisted IMF and the rigidities of the IMF policies. Perhaps only Michael Manley and Edward Seger have ever done that. Our current crop of politicians, at least after the 1990s, have never attempted to challenge the IMF for its austerity. They've never done so. Yet Golding and these hypocrites are castigating Trump for challenging this global exploitative economic infrastructure in which the rich gets richer, as Golding is, and the poor gets poorer. I hope you're looking and you're seeing what I am seeing, that our leaders are not there to defend the interest of the ordinary Jamaicans. They are there to defend the interest of the reigning elites, the politicians, and their economic elites. And they can go on their yacht and they can have wonderful times. The other day, PJ Pastor celebrated his 90th birthday, and all of them were there partying and they're singing and they're having a great time. A great time. While the majority of Jamaicans are barely eking out a basic standard of living. I don't know about you, but when you go to Jamaica and you look at the level of poverty there, and you say, my God, what has changed over the years? What has really changed? I'm seeing the children, and these children are innocent. They're just posting TikTok videos on their TikTok accounts, right? And you see the schools. Nothing has changed since the 1950s. Nothing. Perhaps some little whiteboards there. The same desks and chairs, the same walls. You look at the ceilings, they're chippy. mold might be mold ridden, mold infested classrooms. Nothing has changed in Jamaica, right? Because of austerity and the cutting back and not building. We're always cutting back and we're not building. We're only building for the wealth of the elites and the so-called capitalist investors. And that is what your boy, Bruce Golding, is talking about. That the capitalists, the manufacturing class, they're just looking for cheaper labor, which is more efficient. And efficiency means that they're going to say, beat it, right? And pay you less money, pay you practically nothing to do a job that requires huge amount of mental and physical labor. What a society. What a wicked society which we live in. What a society. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe.